William the Conqueror's invasion of England in 1066 stands as one of the most significant moments in British history, reshaping the nation's identity, governance, and even its language. Before we dive into the long-lasting effects of his conquest, let's first set the scene by looking at who William was, what drove him to invade, and how he succeeded in altering the course of English history forever. William was born in 1028 in Falaise, Normandy, the illegitimate son of Robert, Duke of Normandy, and a commoner named Herleva. His illegitimacy earned him the nickname William the Bastard in his early years. Despite the controversial circumstances of his birth, William inherited the Dukedom of Normandy at a young age, following his father's death. As a child, his rule was precarious, with many nobles plotting to overthrow him. But William, with a mix of cunning, determination, and ruthlessness, managed to consolidate his power. By the time he reached adulthood, William had transformed Normandy into a strong and efficient duchy. His ambition, however, stretched beyond his own land. Across the English Channel lay England, a rich and powerful kingdom ruled by Edward the Confessor. And it was here that William set his sights. The succession crisis in England following the death of Edward the Confessor in January 1066 created a perfect storm for William's ambitions. Edward died without an heir, and there were several claimants to the throne, including Harold Godwinson, the powerful English earl, and William of Normandy. According to Norman sources, Edward had promised the throne to William during his exile in Normandy, and Harold had allegedly sworn an oath to support William's claim during a visit to Normandy in 1064. However, when Edward died, the English nobles quickly crowned Harold Godwinson as king, rejecting William's claim. For William, this was a direct betrayal. Determined to assert his right to the English throne, William assembled an invasion force. In September 1066, William landed on the south coast of England with a fleet of ships carrying around 7,000 men. Harold, meanwhile, had just defeated another invader, Harald Hardrada of Norway, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in the north of England. Harold's forces were exhausted after their victory, but they immediately marched south to confront William. The two armies met at Hastings on October 14, 1066, in one of the most famous battles in English history. The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. However, in a turning point, Harold was killed, according to some accounts, shot in the eye with an arrow. Without their leader, the English forces crumbled, and William emerged victorious. On Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, marking the beginning of a new era for the country. One of the most immediate and visible changes William brought to England was the introduction of feudalism. In Normandy, William had developed a highly organized feudal system, where loyalty to the ruler was rewarded with land, and landholders were expected to provide military service. William replicated this system in England to secure his hold on power. After his victory, William seized the lands of the English nobles who had supported Harold and redistributed them to his loyal Norman followers. By the end of his reign, an estimated 90% of the land in England was owned by Normans. This drastic land redistribution ensured that William's supporters had a vested interest in maintaining his rule and keeping the English population in check. The English nobility, which had been the dominant force in the country, was effectively wiped out and replaced with a new Norman ruling class. This new aristocracy was bound to William through personal loyalty, military obligation, and importantly, land. To solidify his control and assess the wealth and resources of his new kingdom, William commissioned the creation of the Domesday Book in 1085. This extraordinary document was a detailed survey of England, listing landholdings, resources, and the obligations of tenants. The survey covered most of England and parts of Wales, and provided an unprecedented insight into the economic landscape of the time. The Domesday Book was significant for several reasons. It allowed William to more efficiently tax his subjects and ensure that his vassals were providing the correct amount of military support. It also reinforced the feudal system by recording the obligations of landholders to the king. The Domesday Book remains one of the most remarkable historical documents from medieval England and is still a valuable resource for understanding the country's social and economic structure in the 11th century. Another major impact of William's rule was the transformation of English governance. Before the conquest, England had a relatively decentralized system, with powerful regional lords holding significant influence. William, however, brought with him a centralized form of government that significantly strengthened the power of the monarchy. One of the ways he achieved this was by building castles. These stone fortresses were not only military strongholds, but also symbols of Norman power and authority. Castles, such as the Tower of London, Warwick Castle, and Windsor Castle, were constructed during William's reign and became key to maintaining control over the English population. They allowed the Normans to project power into the countryside and served as bases from which they could suppress any potential uprisings. William also introduced a new legal system that blended Norman and Anglo-Saxon customs. He established royal courts and introduced trial by combat and trial by ordeal as methods of determining guilt. Importantly, William maintained some aspects of the Anglo-Saxon legal system, such as the concept of shire courts, local courts. Placed them under the control of his Norman officials. One of the most profound and lasting effects of the Norman conquest was the transformation of the English language and culture. The Normans spoke a dialect of Old French, and when they became the ruling class in England, their language became the language of the court, the legal system, and the aristocracy. For centuries after the conquest, English kings and nobles spoke French, and French was the dominant language of government and law. This linguistic shift had a profound effect on the English language. Old English, the language of the Anglo-Saxons, began to absorb thousands of French words, particularly in the realms of law, governance, art, and religion. Over time, this blending of Old English and Norman French evolved into Middle English, the language of Geoffrey Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. Beyond language, the Normans brought with them new architectural styles, such as the Romanesque, characterized by rounded arches and massive stone buildings. Many of England's most famous cathedrals, including Durham and Ely, were constructed in the decades following the conquest and reflect this Norman influence. The Normans also brought changes to English cuisine, fashion, and social customs. The fusion of Anglo-Saxon and Norman cultures created a unique hybrid that would eventually form the foundation of English identity. It's important to note that William's conquest of England was not universally accepted, and he faced numerous rebellions during the early years of his reign. The most serious of these occurred in the north of England, where Anglo-Saxon resistance was particularly strong. In response to a rebellion in 1069, William launched the infamous Harrying of the North, a brutal campaign to crush opposition. William's forces laid waste to vast areas of the north, burning villages, slaughtering livestock, and killing thousands of people. The region was left devastated, and it took decades for it to recover. This campaign was a stark demonstration of William's determination to maintain control over his new kingdom, no matter the cost. The effects of William the Conqueror's invasion of England were felt long after his death in 1087. His establishment of a centralized monarchy laid the foundation for the development of the English state. The introduction of feudalism created a new social and political order that would shape English society for centuries. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of William's conquest is the cultural and linguistic transformation of England. The fusion of Norman and Anglo-Saxon traditions created a new, uniquely English culture that would continue to evolve in the centuries to come. Even today, traces of the Norman conquest can be seen in England. The English language, with its rich mix of Germanic and Romance elements, is a direct result of the Norman influence. The castles that dot the English countryside are reminders of the Norman military power, and the legal and governmental systems established by William continue to influence English law and politics. In short, William the Conqueror changed England forever. His invasion in 1066 set off a chain of events that transformed the country's language, culture, governance, and society, leaving an indelible mark that is still visible today.